This group of translators who work on the translation tirelessly to get the right words and feelings across. And also led by a committee of translators and students, especially with the chair, Elysia Tan, working meticulously with great care and effort to complete the book project as well as today's event. So we have a great lineup to really look into the story of the book and also journeys of translators learning Chinese classical poetry. But before we get to that, please allow me to first welcome James Heimowitz, President of China Institute, for opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Shenzhen. Thank everybody for coming today. It's such a delight and such an honor. You should see in my office now, which has some relics from the very beginning of China Institute, starting from 1926. A beautiful copy in its own place, just of the book. It is spectacular. And I'm so proud of each of you and each of your contributions to make such a wonderful work. And it's even more important now, the work of China Institute. I don't need to say, I'm surrounded by colleagues who have been here longer than I have. Shenzhen was here. Ben has been here now, what, 3 years? And we were barely. So this is just my 7th anniversary today, actually, for joining China Institute, but I'm surrounded by people with a wealth of experience and a wealth of knowledge who bring to the very spirit and DNA of what China Institute is all about. And I think now can't describe the relations between China and America as anything less than tortured. And I think that it's a deep problem because we have a shared future, China and America, and we share a planet. And the world's most consequential relationship exists between China and America. And you are the people that are going to be shaping the future. And you are the people who are going to be responsible for helping the world to better understand that there is a fact that we have a shared future. And I spent over 2 hours yesterday with China's ambassador here in New York. And I told him we were recounting China Institute. I was telling him about this event that I was planning to come to today. And my feeling was the only way that we can move forward with the shared future that I mentioned is if we have a deeper understanding that happens through culture, it happens through language, it happens through art, it happens through the way we do business. It doesn't happen between the negotiating tables of politicians. And so thank each of you for being an ambassador in your own way, for taking the time to go on a journey to understand and appreciate a culture as ancient and important as China. And I hope that, I see in this room sprinkled all different ages and ethnicities, but I hope that more people will be inspired by the amazing work that you've produced. And I'm so proud to be the president of China Institute at this time when I see the fruits coming, to bear from all of your input and efforts. So I just, again, a big thank you, and a big congratulations. You guys are the reason that China Institute exists. And we're so lucky to have guiding us and shepherding us, Ben Wang. And Ben Wang is one of China Institute's treasures. And we're all really, really grateful to learn from his wisdom, to learn from everything that he can share with us, and to do it in a way that makes us feel inspired and gives us the energy to move forward and brings to life something that others could dismiss as just being part of the past. Well, our past shapes our future. And it's so important, and we're so lucky, and each of you is so lucky to have Ben touch you in some way. And I'm so grateful for everything you do. So Ben, please come take over. It's your leadership and guidance that brought this to bear.
Hi, everybody. I'm so happy. This is the second time I left my apartment in a year. Last time when I ventured outside of my apartment was also to come to the China Institute. this is my family, this is my home. And I'll get to that a little later. But today, you know, I asked for 3 minutes to talk, right? Obviously, it's got to be longer, maybe 30. Okay, the more I think about this, the more words can enter into my mind. So this is my way, you know, just so can you imagine what my students, my babies had to put up with me? You know, once I get on that I get up to talk, there's no end. Words just come out. And so, but it's not for nothing am I known as master of digression, you know. So when I teach, all I do is digress, you know, because there's so little inside of my mind to teach. So I have to talk about other, you know, insignificant, frivolous things to let time pass. So that's my tactic. But I never told my students this, you know. Now they'll never come back to my class anymore. But anyway, well, standing here today as I came with a dear friend whom I'm going to thank. So, filling my mind is just one word: thanks, thanks, thanks. First, I need to thank my comrades, people who work with me, who helped me for all these years, for all this time. And I would say, number one is Lin Lao Shi. So right here, Lin Xiang. He came up, first of all, I am a total idiot when it comes to technology, which is not to say that I'm good at other things. I'm equally bad with other things, but I'm particularly stupid with technological things. So last semester and the last, Xiaqiang was not with me. He was in China. So right after he came back, I asked him, I said, would you come to help me, please? Because I had a wonderful help. Yeah, here. And she was helping me. Yeah. But she is so busy being a senior lecturer, senior translator at the United Nations. She is so busy. So I took up her precious time. She helped me and to host my talks via Zoom. And then Xiaqiang came back. And I was elated. I was elated about his return to New York. So I said to him, I said, come help me. So he said, of course, he's so gracious. And then he came up with all these things, like to put a red dot above the character that I'm teaching. I'm trying to teach the etymology and the origin of these characters. With every character, Xiaqiang would put a red dot above the character. And also, if I'm talking about the first line of a quatrain of a poem, and Xiaqiang would underline that line. So I think that helped me teach, but I really do think I never asked any students because I just took it for granted that they were benefited from Xiaqiang's what he did. So, and he did a lot of other things. Now I can't do without him. You know, by the way, I just sent him the handouts for the autumn term. You will receive it in your email. Make sure you read it because he is one master you must come to meet. He is so too important for words in the history of Chinese literature. So anyway, to come back to this book, I have to tell you something bordering upon being very morbid. But I want to warn you, it's good morbid. It's not bad morbid. And what is it? That is, I recently told a dear friend of mine, he saw the book and he said, wow, what a gorgeous book. So he scanned look at read the book quickly, and he said, wow, what a beautiful book. It's well bound and it's just perfect. So I said to him, I said, would you do me a favor? Would you promise me something? He said, what? I said, if I die, I didn't say when I die. I said, if I die, because I don't intend to die as old as I am, you know. So I said, if I die someday, make sure you put this book right next to my heart or upon my heart when you bury me. Do you promise? He said, yes, I promise. So need I tell you more about what this book means to me? I don't think so. I think you know how important it is. It is a dream come true for me. And as for you, as I told Elysia, after the first sight of this book, I said, you guys have made history. Because in all the 57 years that I have been in this country, I have read so many translated books of translation of classical Chinese from Chinese into English. And none is like your book, which is one poem being translated by 5, 6, 7, 8 wonderful, marvelous translators. And this is the first book I ever saw. And I do believe I've read a lot, especially when I was younger. Now that I'm not seeing too well, you know, so I don't read too much anymore. I only read the old books like Graham Greene, Jean Rees, and Evening War, and all these things, and Ford Madox Ford, you know. So now this book is so precious to me. I place it on my bookshelf right next to Jean Rees and Christina Rossetti. Okay, just to tell you, because I used to adore Graham Greene, but my heart changed after I read Jean Rees. Now it's number 1 is Jean Rees, number 2 is Graham Greene, number 3 is Evening War. That is the first 3, you know. So this book is right next to, in between, Jean Rees and Christina Rossetti, one of my favorite poets. I hate to use the word poetess. Don't you think it's kind of negative? But anyway, so this is how I feel about this book. So I asked for 3 minutes, 2 minutes only, because I just wanted to say thank you, thank you, thank you to all my babies. But I must thank 3, even though I thank all of you, but I need to single out 3 names. I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing, but this is what my heart wants me to do. I need to single out 3 people to thank, to give to them my special thanks. Number 1, Elysia. She is so good. Number 2 is Laura, and she is so dear to my heart. You know, you guys are so brilliant. And then, Yiheng. The outing of this book is tremendous. Word cannot express how much work she has done. And so my gratitude towards her knows no bounds. Now next, I must thank some important people. Who? The ones without whom there would be no Ben Wang, which is not to suggest Ben Wang is a big shot, but I give talks to a few students who love me. They come to me, you know, I don't know why, but they're so good to me. They come to me semester after semester, warts and all, they love me. I don't know why, but they like me. But I also need to extend a true word of thanks to China Institute, who has provided me with the forum that permits me to do what I like and to share whatever I have in my heart and in my mind with those who are willing to come to me. So I need to thank. So other than Lin Lao Shi, Yong Qian, I need to thank Tina, Xue Fei, Wan Ling. They all helped me so much. And they want me. They like me for no reason, for unknown reason to me, they like me. And Shen Zhan, she's the director of the program. She likes me. And last but absolutely not the least, James Heimowitz, our president, our leadership. Without them, there is no Ben Wang. So there are no, all my babies would be taught by someone else, but not me. So I need to thank China Institute. And I hope China Institute, in Chinese, we have two character phrase. The Japanese people love to use it, which is 万岁, meaning longevity, long life, live forever. China Institute 万岁. So that's the voice of my heart. So I have taken up enough time. So thank you, thank you, thank you. That's all I can say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wang Lao Shi. And thanks, James, for your remarks as well. Thank you so much for your warm and really, it's very touching to hear you talking about your journey and your time with China Institute. And now our hearts and minds are all really inspired to hear the story of the book itself, as well as the story of the translators, your students, how they come along and come together for today's program. So next, I will welcome Mia Dalva. He has long been a student and admirer of Asian art and literature, and has always been fascinated by the art of translation. By profession, he is an antique dealer in New York, specializing in the French decorative arts of the 17th and 18th century, and also worked extensively with Ming and Qing Dynasty porcelains and lacquer work. So please, Mia.
Hello. Hello. In the good old pre-COVID days, we would take ourselves down here for classes and lectures on Chinese poetry taught by Ben. The first were in 2015 when China Institute moved here. We were a very diverse group originating from all over the world with very varied and different histories. Interesting group of people, I tell you. But all of us united with an abiding interest in Chinese art and literature. Many of us had heard Ben lecture, and so we're primed to take his courses on poetry. And as you heard in 2 minutes, Ben is very enticing and interesting and full of wonderful ideas. So we were given handouts showing a poem's Chinese characters with the pinyin transliteration of the character sound and an English meaning below each character. There would be an English translation of the whole poem, sometimes Ben's, sometimes other people. And Ben would give us a brief history of the poem's period, a bit of the poem's life, the poet's life story, references to some of the esoteric myths or events that appeared in some poems. And he would walk us through the poems, line by line, often character by character, to guide us through the cinematic world that the poem revealed. He showed us the necessity of annotation to really understand the poem, since there are sometimes many meanings for a single character, and the poems are full of ambiguity and subtlety. And that is virtually impossible to translate one word unless you're very, very lucky. He showed us that there are huge amounts of meaning that were contained in the magically succinct lines, because the Chinese poems are very, very concentrated. And again, something very, very difficult to translate. He showed us aspects of the work's poetics, and especially in the Tang poetry that we're doing, and the rather strict rules for rhyme and tonal schemes, also something untranslatable, really. He recited the poems to show us their inherent musicality. That, believe me, no one could translate. He taught us that Chinese is a visceral language that hits you immediately. It's a poetry with people who weep and their noses run. So I ask you, how do you translate mucus poetic? There you go, kind of a symbol of how difficult this whole thing is. You know, when a Chinese person in one of these poems feels very strong emotions, it's as if the guts were cut. So again, difficult, although the concept hits you viscerally when you read the poem. He taught us that though the languages and the societies are very different, there is one humanity. He would say, there ain't no East, there ain't no West. And he would show us that by coming up with an uncannily close English poem that paralleled the meaning of the Chinese poem. And he also showed us that Tennessee Williams seems to have been able to time travel back to ancient China, and there was some kind of relationship going on there. Ben often calls the poems timeless, and they are. They are truth and beauty, and they always gleam in whatever now they are read in. So for these thousands of years, people have been reading these poems, have been excited by them. And for us, after being walked through them by Ben, they're as real for us as they are for all the people who have read these things throughout history. And then, almost the most important thing, he would delve into the makeup of many of the individual characters. And then there are the parts that are composed of radicals, which are kind of simple ideas and terms and translations that are joined together. And it's very fundamental to understand the meaning of the character, and it tells you something of the story that the character gives you. And he would then regale us with the earliest form of the character and how it evolved to the characters that we know. Sometimes, if we were very lucky, terminating in the amazing and beautiful action painting that is Ben's wild, perversive style of calligraphy. And we thank him. And we begged him in the book to put some of his calligraphy in the book to show what Chinese poetry really looks like. and he graciously conceded, and I think it is an incredible boost to it all. But, so we were in these classes, and at one point, Ben said, no more given translations. He wanted his babies, us, to make a translation. And it's a really brilliant pedagogical idea, because Ben could plainly deduce from our works whether we really got what he had taught us to explain the poem. And it also allowed us in a very strange way to inhabit the poem. Because as I said, the poems are very cinematic, and in Ben's teaching, we're somehow drawn into the world, and our forcing to put it into our own words made the poem a living part of our experiences. And it's, you know, one of the great educational experiences I've ever had. He always replied to our efforts when we would send them in by email with great courtesy, and he would thank us, which, you know, always amazed me, and make, you know, very gentle corrections when we really went off the rails with, you know, some of our ideas. But he always said, your take on the poem is as important as mine, and you should pursue what you think is the soul of the poem. So in a very real way, all of these poems are Ben's translations, but he allowed them to make them ours. And I think you'll understand that when you hear how varied the translations are of a single poem. And if you are lucky enough to have the book, you can see many, many versions of the same poem. And so after a certain while that we've been sending in these translations, Ben said, you know, these are good. And it would be his dream to see them published in a book. And, you know, it was a little bit like, I don't know how many of you were old enough to have seen them, but there was this wonderful series of MGM movies in the old days, and Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland would be together, and one of them would say, hey, let's put on a show. So this was sort of the same thing. Ben said, hey, let's put on a book. And we all said, well, you know, could we? And indeed, miraculously, we did. And so the actual work of putting on the book was that there was this committee, and with Ben had provided us with the translations of the poems that he had chosen, and the translators were given an opportunity to edit them, because I know I'm constantly tweaking them and turning and thinking about them, finding a word in a newspaper article. I said, oh my God, that's it. Because he has made the poems live for us, and it's uncanny how many things in modern life overlap with the poems, and we see things in life that we had seen in these poems, and it's one of the extraordinary things. So Ben wrote the introductions to the poets, you know, explaining them. The beautiful layout was provided to us by Ying, and we debated and edited and talked, and the final beautiful result existed. A glossary was added for terms that might not be immediately understood by American English readers. And after many months, a printer was found, the right paper was chosen, the book cover, and so the whole thing came together. So the title really sums the whole thing up. Visions, East and West. An ancient Chinese poet's vision was translated by him into poetry. Many, many years later, The poem is annotated by Ben, allowing us more than 13 or 1400 years later to translate those visions into our visions. And with this book, you all can come along on the ride with us. So, thank you. And thank you. And thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Leah. I also want to put a note as Leah was sharing his learning experience, the courses that Ben has been teaching with Yongqiang's help or with Zhu Yan's help. There are so many people who have come together to make this learning experience happen. So I also want to thank all of you who are involved. I see Zhu Yan is sitting right in front of me here, and Yongqiang is over there. So next, I want to introduce and welcome Mia Wollf and Carmen De Lemos-Chiarandini. Mia is a painter and a former aerialist. She has a great fascination with words and pictures. Thus, there has been long foray into classical Chinese and making books. Carmen is a retired professor of cell biology from the NYU School of Medicine. Besides golfing, Chinese brush painting, volunteering, she has traveled extensively to China, made 12 trips to 20 provinces. I hope that will come back soon and we will travel to China again. So now, please welcome Mia.
Maybe we can show that rose that Mia made.
Yeah, she will.
Oh, is this good? I've been studying with Ben just shy of a decade. But a decade isn't that long to spend with classical Chinese poetry. One could easily fall down that rabbit hole for a lifetime. For the first couple of years, I absorbed some grammar and became familiar with its historical, metaphorical context of the form. I was particularly entranced with its visual, cinematic quality. It gave me wonderful visions, which as a painter is a great boon. Little did I know that I was merely playing outside the temple, admiring the carvings and inscriptions, thinking that was the whole of it. One evening, I'm sitting in class and we are studying Meng Haoran's Chun Xiao, Spring Dawn. We're going over, as usual, meanings and etymology. And we get to the last lines, last two words, which you can see up on the screen. Duo Xiao. The etymology of duo is either 2.5 moons or 2 pieces of flesh, and Xiao is 4 pieces of dust. My brain at this moment fastens on these 2 characters, and I see duo as flower petals falling, as in the poem, and Xiao as the dust or ground they descend to. So there I am at the metal table, surrounded by the other students, watching Ben at the whiteboard, and the doors that I didn't know existed open wide and I fall through. Suddenly, I am in the infinite field of the poetry, not just the first few layers. I'm thinking, aha, this is what the big deal is. Externally, I'm being a good student, taking notes, but internally, I'm running around, waving my arms, doing the Eureka dance. So I went home and did a painting based on those 2 characters. I began by writing them all over the surface and then just planlessly started painting. And it's called How Many Pebbles? So as you can see, studying with Ben has infused not only my thinking, but my painting practice. The process of translating has loosened up the way my mind works with words across 2 languages, and the continual visual fallout, a weather of images. It has become an ongoing series of epiphanies, which have lit up the inside of my head, making it a more beautiful place to struggle in, to live in, and occasionally to relax in. Thank you.
Next, a comment, please.
I'm not nervous. It's just my throat. I think it's allergies. I'll try my best. My slow and unexpected journey to classical Chinese poetry began at the China Institute in 1969. How did I ever get to be part of Visions, East and West? When I started my association with China Institute on 65th Street in 1969, I knew essentially nothing about China except the basics. Nothing about its history, its language, its art, its literature, and the societal and cultural norms of its people. China was a mysterious land to me. I was born in the Dominican Republic. And so my native language is Spanish. I could show you how to do the merengue, our national dance. I can cook pasteles, our meat pies surrounded by plantains. I could even recite some proverbs in Spanish. But about China, I knew very little. One day, I happened to see an ad about the China Institute in all places but the magazine of the Museum of Natural History. After all, I was a scientist, and this is one of the things that I read. This ad let me sign up for classes, and at that moment, I began my slow and unexpected journey to classical Chinese poetry. One note, I was just a little baby. Next slide, please. I was curious when I read that the China Institute had courses in Chinese brush painting, because painting had always been a consistent hobby of mine. I immediately signed up. This painting, this painting was done in 1974. Just barely see down here. Under the watchful eye of my teacher, Mr. Zhang, who was a friend of C.C. Kwan at the time, I sometimes saw Chinese paintings at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, some which simply took my breath away. These scribbles that I saw on the paintings, I had no idea what they were. And what was that little red square on one of the edges? These scribbles eventually led me to take classes in the Chinese language and in calligraphy. Years later, which would lead me to our current book on poetry of the Tang Dynasty. By the 1970s, I began to travel in Asia, especially China. I had the opportunity to travel as a tourist, as a student, and as a volunteer in China with Earthwatch and with also Global Volunteers. I participated, for example, in anthropological, architectural, paleontological. I cared for giant pandas. I taught English and I even looked for water in the Gobi Desert on a project done by Earthwatch. All these projects allowed me to visit the four corners of China. My interest in Chinese culture grew more and more. Next slide, please. This slide shows the many cultural and literary courses taught by Ben Wang at the China Institute. It doesn't include, as he says, frivolous courses like Mahjong, etc. This is a general summary of his courses. In September 1985, Ben Wang arrived at the China Institute and began to teach Mandarin. Then in 1987, he started to teach Chinese literary courses in addition to the language courses. The first literature course that Ben Wang taught was by coincidence and incredibly Tang poetry. I have taken all of these courses, as I imagine many of you have, all of them except Kuchun and Beijing operas. But not to worry, Ben Wang, I do have your book, Laughter and Tears, translations of selected Kuchun dramas. Some courses I have taken also are Tai Chi, 3 years of cooking classes here, and currently I'm learning Chinese through song. And the next slide. This shows my very first practical Chinese reader. This is the cover of my of a book that is known as the first practical Chinese reader. I will never forget the main characters, Palanka and Gubo. On the first day of class in 1988, a not too tall, gentle man entered the classroom. He was rather debonair and cute. He wore a bow tie. This was going to be very interesting. I finally had signed up for what I now realize pointed me to the world of Chinese literature. But I had to work so hard to get some of this difficult language into my head. I still struggle to speak the language. You can see the many tags at the top of the book. Each tag represents an important point that I had to learn. I wonder why almost every page was tagged. Next slide, please. Ben Wang, in our current classes, often says that he was a bit of a horror in his language classes. You can believe him. I will never forget that I had to say to myself, I'm not going to cry, I'm not going to cry. But I was determined to learn Chinese, and I'm still here. Some men did cry. For homework, I remember writing a character hundreds of times. It took a lot of hours, but I did learn the characters. Next slide. This is a simple slide just to show one of the most things that I appreciate of the teaching that one has done through the years. This shows the etymology of the Chinese title on the book of Visions East and West. There are 4 characters that make up this Chinese title of the book that we're celebrating today. These characters are pine, wind, mountain, and moon. Ben Wang selected these characters from the poem in the book, a reply by Wang Wei, Several students will present their translations of that very poem. Studying the Chinese language and the arts for so many years has finally led me to not learn something about Tang poetry, but to also become familiar with the etymology of some of the characters that we translated, as so nicely explained by Leon. And that's because Ben Wang has always shown us the etymology of characters we are to translate. I finally learned that etymology was the study of what the earliest Chinese characters looked like, what they meant, and their evolution to the modern day form. I am fascinated by this because it's a combination of history and art. I feel also that knowing the etymology of a character has helped me in the translation of poems. It's helped me in learning Chinese and in broadening my admiration for Chinese literature. Briefly, the first column represents the oracle script going up and down. The second one is the sealed script of about 2,000 years ago. And I've only put the third column that shows the modern simplified script. Of course, there are many other stages of the scripts of China between these shown. As example, I want to point out the etymology of mountains and moon. The oracle script of mountain, or shan, below, shows several peaks, which later were simplified into lines. The oracle script of moon, shown above, is its first simple image. In the sealed script, 1 or 2 lines were added, and in the simplified modern script is Yue at the end, which looks nothing like the original. One can think of Shan and Yue as the moon rising in the distant mountains. I never would have dreamed in 1969 that I would get to the point where I could reasonably translate a Tang poem, learn some etymology, and have some of my translations included in this beautiful, striking book. To have the opportunity to contribute to visions, for me, is the culmination of a slow and unexpected journey of over 50 years, from the basic Chinese to translating classical Chinese poetry. Some of you are not even 50 years old. And so I wish to thank Ben Wang and the China Institute. Thank you.
Mia and Carmen for sharing your early stories. Wow, 50 years. I could feel I'm falling into that time path and have a hard time coming out. So next we will hear two recitations of, we will hear recitation of 2 poems, translation of 2 poems in English by the translators in 2 sets of students. The first one is a battle song, Yang Zhou Ci, a heptasyllabic quatrain by Wang Han, who was born in the 7th to 8th century. Known for poems for brilliant colors and clarion tonal schemes, despite a reputation of being arrogant, disagreeable, and rowdy, that, well, for those of you who know the book, that's exactly the quote from the book. So here we will have a taste of his poem through 4 different translations by first Leon Dalva, whom I had the pleasure to introduce earlier, and Sabrina Lee, who's by profession a lawyer, by passion a student of Chinese poetry, John Waldis, fascinated by Chinese characters because they're strange yet wonderful, and blown away by the depths and erudition of Ben Wang, who's presenting today his translation with gratitude to Ben. And last but not least, Laura Zyronek, who besides being one of the translators of this book, also a native Italian speaker, a legal interpreter and translator, and having a long time practice of Tai Chi. Now, please welcome Leah back to the stage.
Hi. My poem has a footnote, so I will explain, and it is for the pipa, which is a Chinese instrument, much like a flute. A battlehead. A beautiful fruity wine glows in its cup tonight, tempting. Softly strung spurs my nerves. This sop falls and bites dust. Oh, pal, don't laugh. From battlefields of yore, how many of those fallen got to rise again?
Requiem from the county of Chill. Fine wine spilling over the luminous cup, eager to indulge, but the strumming pipa is urging us on. My friends, don't snicker if we lay wasted on the battlefield. How many returned from wars since time began?
Beautiful great wine from a glowing glass. My drinking cut short by the pipa's command. As I lie lifeless on the sandy field here, don't laugh. Since antiquity, how many returned from battles?
Hello. This is the calligraphy that our teacher wrote for Yanzhou. So it's a page from the book, as Leon mentioned. Thank you, Wang Wei, for doing that. Elegy of Yangzhou, with nectar from whose sunniest grapes, the precious cup, resplendent through the dark, indulgent inebriation, stirred back to the saddle by pipas inside a charge, felled as drunken swoon on fields of sand. Gentle sir, spare your taunts. From time immemorial, how many would ever woo and restore?
Thank you. Next, we will have 4 translators or students to recite a reply by Wang Wei,酬张少府, a pentasyllabic regulated verse by Wang Wei from 8th century, one of the master poets, painters, and musicians from the High Tang period. This poem, like many of Wang Wei's poems, particularly acclaimed for its refreshing and exquisite depiction of a harmonious union between man and nature, which we need most today. Now we have 4 different translations recited by David Butler, a practicing physician with a strong interest in Chinese culture, Mandarin calligraphy, classical Chinese, and traveled also extensively through China. And Linda Young, on behalf of Doug Collins, who's a painter and a printmaker and teaches cameraless photography at the International Center of Photography in New York, and also a working novelist. The presenter, Linda, grew up in San Francisco's Chinatown and moved to New York City after graduation from Berkeley. She's a student of teacher Ben Wang since 2020 and has gained a deep appreciation for Chinese poetry. Last but not least, Beth Norman, who started her interest in China and Chinese culture when her baby daughter Jingjing Jenny entered her life 20 years ago. Now let's welcome first David Butler.
David is unable to come today. Tomorrow will speak from the keynote.
All right.
Yes, David could not be here, but he's online, so he's watching us. So hello. I'm glad that he asked me to read this because this poem is very much like David. It captures a sense of detachment and equanimity. So here is David's translation of Zhang Shaofu, answering junior official Zhang. In one's later years, happiness is found in solitude. Worldly concerns do not trouble the mind. Not envisioning any grand designs. Knowing their folly, I return to the old grove. Wind blows through pines, my sash is loosened. Moonlight on the mountain shines, a tune placed on the chin. You ask, dear sir, the reasons for triumph or downfall? The fisherman's song deeply penetrates the shore.
This is a poem by Doug Collin, and I'm reading it on his behalf. Sorry, this is almost like my regular attire. He says, his translation is, advancing years, we seek a consoling peace. Worldly affairs no longer concerns us. We look inward, past ambition, our mind empties. To old woods we return, to the pines, to the wind that releases our robes, and the lute we pluck under the bright mountain moon. My friend, you ask the way to success, but the fisherman's song touches deep waters. Thank you. To Zhang, junior magistrate, humbly I reply. Quietude for my twilight years, minding not this or that, no grand scheme in mind. All homestead bound, my useless self. The breeze with scent of pine unties my sedge, strumming my harp under the moon. My friend, you ask, what lies behind success and truth? Come listen to the fishermen singing deep along the riverbank.
John Magistrate asks the way, is the reply. In this late, quiet time, my old man's heart no longer touched by thousands of concerns. I look inside, no plans for outside. Return to my inner worlds, inner woods. Wind through the pines, loosen sash of my robe. Moon from the hill as I play chin. And now, you ask me, the way? Can you find the way of a song in the river?
Thanks to all. Now we come to our final part of the program before Q&A. Please welcome Elysia Tan, a scientist with a love of classical Chinese poetry and a great fan of teacher Ben Wang, a translator under the homework pressures from Wang Laoshi. She will speak to her journey of learning to translate classical Chinese poetry and recite Untitled Wu Ti by Li Yu in both English and its Chinese original. Elysia, please.
I would like to share with you teacher Ben Wang's masterful teaching and my own journey learning to translate Tang poetry. Tang poetry is widely regarded as the pinnacle of poetic achievement in China. Even at the level of surface masters, these poems are jewels. But as our teacher so ably revealed to us, there are always metaphors and deep meanings to be had. It helps to have a knowledge of China's history, literature, and culture, as well as a knowledge of the poets' lives and times. Wang Laoshi, as we call him, told us that anything we can excavate between the lines, beneath the lines, between characters, as well as within the character, are all fair game. He taught us the tonal scheme of each poem so we can appreciate its music. He introduced us to its choreographic rendering so we can appreciate its beauty as a work of visual art. He also requires that we translate what we learn into English and gets very upset if we don't turn in our homework. So when we started on Tang poetry, I was like, what is English poetry? What are the rules? I had no clue. Fortunately, our teacher also told us that classical Chinese poetry cannot be translated, emphatically cannot be translated. They can only be annotated. Translation in prose is acceptable. What a relief. To translate a poem's music and the art of its choreography is very simply impossible. It is hard enough to translate the surface masters, let alone the metaphors and hidden meanings. But do not reveal too much of the hidden meanings, said Wang Laoshi. That would deprive the translation of the poem's mystery and art. Given an English audience likely lack of familiarity with things Chinese, how are they to uncover the mysteries and deep meanings unaided? To reveal or not to reveal, that is the question. The poem on screen, next slide please, is called Untitled by Li Yu. Li Yu was the last emperor of the Southern Tang Dynasty in the 13th century. He was a most reluctant and neglectful monarch, but he was a brilliant poet. After his armies were defeated decisively by the armies of Northern Song Emperor, he surrendered. This poem was composed on his journey to the court of his capital. Let's take a look. Next slide, please. The first line of the third couplet of the poem you saw earlier literally reads, clouds cage distant peaks, sorrow thousand sheets in Chinese. Wang Laoshi taught us that the very etymology of the characters adds meaning and drama to the poem. Let's take a closer look at the second character of this line. Next slide, please. This character, long, means cage, or as a verb, to cage. The very top part of the character is another character, the character for bamboo. The rest of the character is the character for dragon. The ancient Chinese who created this character believed that a cage made of bamboo was so strong that it can even encage the mythical dragon. Dragon, of course, is the symbol of the emperor. Next slide, please. Let's look at this line again. Ancient Chinese also believed that the emperor was the son of heaven, and he ruled with the mandate of heaven. Here we have an emperor dethroned, a son of heaven who has lost his mandate of heaven, a dragon caged. Clouds are up in the sky from heaven. High peaks can also be a metaphor for the emperor. To Li Yi, it must have seemed that heaven was so displeased with him, it sends down the clouds to encage him. His masterful invocation of the etymology of the word to cage really adds poignancy to this line. Wang Lao's inclusion of etymology in his teaching is unique and masterful. It gives us a rare window into the minds of the ancient Chinese. Next slide, please. The second line of the third couplet literally reads, rains beat returning boats, tears 10,000 rows. Returning boats. Li Yi was a captive being taken from his home to the land of his former enemy. Certainly he wasn't returning. However, his empire and home were no more. He was a prisoner of war being delivered to his new sovereign. By definition, his new home is in the land of the victor. What a return. Moreover, the character for return, Wei, can also denote Da Wei, grand return, a metaphor for one's final journey, death. Next slide, please. Rain is also from the sky, from heaven. Heaven's fury knew no bounds. It even sent pelting rains to beat the Li's boat of grand return. Classical Chinese poetry are often devoid of pronouns. They can be read from the perspective of the first, second, or third person, either in the singular or in the plural. They can even be read from the perspective of the celestial high above, looking down upon the minions on earth. For this translation, I chose the intimacy of the first person singular. Beyond the surface luster, I tried to imagine what might be in the poet's mind. Untitled, Jiangnan and Jiangbei, resplendent and fecund lands, my ancestral homesteads. These last 30 years were but a dream. My Suzhou palace, the gardens and porcheras, are today deserted and cold. My Yangzhou palace, the terraces, are now desolate wastelands. Bands of clouds descend upon the distant peaks, like cages corralling the dragon. Sorrow surges up in 1,000 sheets. The rains pelting this raft of return. Tears pour down my cheeks in 10,000 streams. The old pleasures no more. My punishments meted out by heaven. There will be no return for me. My family, brothers and all, count counting 400 souls sitting at our ease, unendurable, thinking deep thoughts of our fates, unthinkable. This was, in fact, my most revealing translation. Sometimes I thought, too revealing. Anyway, next slide, please. Now, please allow me to recite this beautiful poem, the Chinese, not the translation, in Chinese, to share with you a little bit of its music. 无题，江南江北旧家乡，30年来梦一场。无怨恭维今冷落，广陵台殿已荒凉。云龙远秀愁千片，欲打归舟泪万行。一家兄弟400口，不堪闲坐系思量。
It really transforms the time. So before I conclude the program for today, I want to open the floor to see if there are any questions from the audience or from our speakers. We can pass along the mic in the audience. I also want to invite my colleague Aaron Nicholson, who's online, come into this space together with us, and we can also see if there are any questions from the online audience. So I want to see if any questions. Aaron is coming here. And I also want to thank Aaron for his assistance for today's program, which is one of our first public programming in this new space. And also the first time we are doing a hybrid, that we are having this program here and also have the live streaming online. I also want to thank the audience to be present with us today here and also online to join this program. My final thoughts and final note also want to go back to the very beginning when Leon mentioned that through the translation, this becoming a living experience of all the students and translators. And vice versa, I think, by translation, the translations give the poems from thousands and hundreds of years ago its life in today's time, and very personally connected to every one of us. So I want to thank Wang Laoshi for your guidance, your inspiration, your teaching, the students and translators who make great effort to learn and to put the book together, and also to the audience coming together that we are making a great learning community to continue the timeless beauty of Chinese language and culture. Thank you very much. And I also, as Elysia is very much taking care of every detail, we have 2 tables in the back for book sales and also for speakers to pick up your prepaid books. And because the physical copy of the book is very much a limited version, we make the e-version free for download at China Institute's website. So we can also send out a follow-up email that you can find the link there as well. Last but not least, I also want to again thank Yiheng, who's not only a great designer for the book, but the beautiful PowerPoint. Thank you for your artistic design to make this book project and the program Beautiful. Thanks to all. That's our program today.
Thank you.